Good morning. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to a roundtable with the title A Roller Coaster Ride, the 3 decades since the breakup of Czechoslovakia. My name is Petr Kopecky. I'm from Leiden University, and my role is to chair this great roundtable. I love roundtables, but when we were given the program and saw that it's 8:30 on Friday morning, we were a little bit disconcerted. Nevertheless, I see that there is quite a number of you in the audience, so thank you very much for coming, and I hope you will enjoy the roundtable. The roundtable is organized by the ECPR. The mastermind behind the roundtable really is Tim Haughton, who I will introduce in a minute. But let me also remind you that there is a journal called East European Politics. There should be a logo of the journal on one of the slides. Tim, you put it on the slides. So this is I'm a co-editor of the journal. It is a journal, comparative politics journal, that publishes scholarship on East European politics. So should you have anything interesting to offer to the journal, you can speak to me or write to us at the journal and offer your paper. If that happens, the logo disappears. Okay, let me introduce the panelists. We have 2 colleagues from Comenius University, Darina, Malova, and we have Zsolt. Darina is unfortunately not present. She's not present physically, but she will join us online to provide her comments. From Charles University, we have Petra Guasti, and from Birmingham University, we have Tim Haughton. Each of the speakers will speak for about 10-12 minutes on a specific topic. They will introduce that topic. And the idea here is, of course, this is a roundtable. So the idea is to then use these remarks to incite a discussion. So afterwards, after these interventions, we will hopefully have a discussion on the topic. And I think we have agreed that we start with Tim Haughton. Tim.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me all okay? So, first and foremost, I wanted to say some thank yous. Firstly, thank you to Petr. Big děkuju to Petr Kopecky. We were originally going to do this as an online event back in the autumn. It didn't work out, and then Petr had the great idea to propose it for ECPR. So, děkuju to Petr. Also, děkujem to Hanna Kubatova, I don't know if she's here, but for agreeing to the idea of having the panel here. Thirdly, I want to say thanks to my frequent co-author, Kevin Deegan-Krause, because some of the things I'll talk about are very much collective. And finally, I really want to thank you all for coming at 8:30 on the final day of a conference in a city that brews some of the best beer in the world. So thank you very much. Okay. What I want to try to do in my few minutes is to make a few arguments and to try and throw a few things out there to get some discussion going. So I want to say something about anniversaries and time, which I think is important on this panel. And then I want to say something about party politics and make basically 3 arguments to do with party politics in this region. Firstly, I want to make an argument that actually the post-federal dimension of politics in Slovakia was more important in some respects, particularly in the Slovak case, than the post-communist dimension. Sorry for the typo on there, the grammatical error. Secondly, I want to make an argument that actually governability, clean and effective governability, is really a key element in the party politics in the Czech and Slovak republics in the 21st century. And thirdly, I want to say that particularly in the Slovak case, there is a pathology of politics, which I will call, don't you want to be in my gang? Okay, so those are the points that I'm going to make in the next 10, 12 minutes or so. So firstly, in terms of anniversaries, this is a panel reflecting on anniversaries, and it gets us also to reflect on time. Lech Wałęsa famously once said that how you see things depends on where you sit. But I would also argue how you see things depends on when you look. And what's really striking about the cases of the Czech and Slovak republics is that if we were to have this panel after 10 years or after 20 years or after 30 years, or indeed if we hold a similar panel in 40 years' time, we might actually come to slightly different conclusions about the transformation paths of these countries. What's really striking from a comparative perspective is the Czech Republic has had a more its path has been a little straighter, although with certainly some twists and turns along the way. In Slovakia, as Zsolt and Darina's colleague Sonia Somalani wrote about, that the path of transformation in Slovakia has been a klukata cesta, which kind of translates as a kind of zigzag path. But what's also quite interesting to reflect about anniversaries and about time is also our judgments on certain politicians and judgments on certain developments varies at the point at which we might make those judgments. So for me, a really interesting case is the case of Miloš Zeman, who's been both Prime Minister and President of this country. What's interesting is if we reflect on him, if, for example, we go back to 2002, our judgment of Miloš Zeman might be quite positive. More than any other politician, we could argue he's the man that got the Czech Republic into the European Union, right? So we might actually view him positively. If Miloš Zeman had gone and just hugged trees, as he promised to do for the rest of his life, and drink Becherovka, we might then view that time very positively. But yet his return to power we might view quite negatively. But that also makes us reflect a little bit on our judgments that we might have made a decade or a decade and a half ago. Equally, I would suggest, if you think about a politician like Robert Fico, also we might come to slightly different judgments depending at the time at which we might draw those conclusions. We think back to Fico back in the late 1990s, in the early 2000s, even his first governments, we might actually reflect on it, not necessarily incredibly positively, but reflect on this was a party and a politician that helped get or integrate Slovakia into a number of European structures. Our judgment of Fico, though, might well be influenced by more recent events. We think about the last time he was in government and the murder of a journalist and his fiancée, or indeed thinking about the rhetoric of Robert Fico today when he's incredibly kind of pro-Russian in his rhetoric. And a very different kind of rhetoric of language. So that's one thing that I just wanted to reflect on in terms of anniversaries, and I think is really important in a panel like this. So let me get back to my day job, which is really party politics. Probably most of people in this room know quite a bit about Czech and Slovak party politics, but let me just say this, for example, is the US case, nice and simple structure of party politics. This is the Czech Republic. A little bit more complicated, but nonetheless, from the Czech case, what we can say is that Czech party politics until 2010 was largely structured around four main parties: the Communists, the Christian Democratic Union, the Civic Democratic Party, and the Czech Social Democrats. The real changes in Czech party politics began in 2010 with that particular election. Slovakia, in contrast, has been a little bit more complicated from the beginning. So this is my co-author and I, Kevin Diegerkraus, in our nerdy fascination. We enjoy creating these kinds of diagrams. So it's a very simple party system in Slovakia. But what I also want to point out in the Slovak case, which I think is quite an important thing to emphasize, is also the emergence of lots of new political parties. And in fact, if we just look at the last election, three things I quickly want to flag up. Firstly, how most of the parties that crossed the electoral threshold at the last election are relatively new. The oldest one was 18, and that was Robert Fico's party. Secondly, what's interesting is how many of those parties are still or were led by the leaders that founded them. There have been one or two changes since, and thirdly, what's striking is the number of new parties that have emerged since the 2020 election. Some of these parties will win significant slices of the vote at the next election. So let me try and make 3 points about why we've seen this kind of fluidity of party politics and some variations. And hopefully I'm not doing too badly on time. So the first argument I want to make, which I think is an important one, particularly on the Slovak case, is a lot of people writing about this region often talk about the kind of post-communist experience. But actually, if we're thinking about the structure of party politics in a country like Slovakia, I would argue that the post-federal politics is actually more important. That Slovakia, particularly in the period up until 2004, when it joined the European Union, essentially politics was about the politics of independence. It was about building structures. It was about who belonged to the state. It was about how do we make Slovakia a successful independent country. But one of the reasons why the post-federal dimension I'd suggest is quite important is about sequencing. So what's striking in the Czechoslovak case, as opposed to a number of other federations in the wider Central East European region, is that the exit from communism and the exit from federalism were not simultaneous. So crucially, you had a period from 1989 through until 1992-93 in which there was still a common state of Czechoslovakia. That then created lots of raw material for politicians like Vladimir Mečiar in Slovakia, like a number of other more nationally inclined politicians to become dominant figures in the country in that period. So I think that this is a dimension that's often kind of overlooked. If we go back to our original literature, we think about Offe and the triple transition. That third element, the process of nation state building, I would suggest is often overlooked. A second point I want to make about why we see a lot of fluidity is that actually I'm going to be a bit provocative and say that I think ideological factors are often overemphasized by some scholars in terms of looking at the structure of party politics. What really Czech and Slovak politics is about for a lot of voters is about governability and the search for clean and effective governance. If we think about the breakthroughs of new parties in the Czech Republic, like Věci veřejné, Public Affairs in 2010, or we think about Babiš in 2013, much of the appeal of those was about clean government, but also effective government. So this is a billboard from 2013. Andrej Babiš kind of arguing here, we're not politicians, makáme, which is like, we get things done, I think is a reasonable translation of makáme. If anyone has a better one, let me know. But that I would suggest is really important and helps explain appeals of many political parties in both countries. Moreover, if we look at the Slovak case, I would suggest looking ahead to the elections that are going to be taking place quite soon. If we think about what's happened since 2020, if we think that Igor Matovic, whose party won that election, basically on an anti-corruption, we will run the country better appeal. Here he is defending or putting himself against Fico and saying that Fico defends thieves. Thank you. Can't even remember English sometimes. But since then, what we've seen throughout the COVID period and up until today is a very chaotic style of government, very chaotic government in Slovakia, exacerbated, yes, by the COVID crisis, but also more significantly by spats between politicians in the coalition. And so I would suggest to you that if looking ahead to the Slovak elections, what's striking is that one of the main reasons why a politician like Robert Fico is quite popular at the moment is what he is promising people is stability, order, social values, yeah? Stabilita, poriadok, sociálne istoty. These are actually quite powerful reasons why a lot of voters will either stay at home or may actually vote for Fico. So yes, I'm not suggesting that the Russian dimension, I'm not suggesting that disinformation, I'm not suggesting that other ideological factors aren't important, but we shouldn't underestimate the fact that simple governability and the desire for stability and governance is key to a lot of voters. The third point that I want to make about why we've seen a lot of churn is what I call the do you want to be in my gang syndrome. We've all read our Albert Hirschman. We know you have exit, you have voice, and you have loyalty. Basically, in Slovak party politics in particular, politicians, if they don't like things, they leave and set up their own party. Moreover, they leave, set up their own party, and then often they don't want to collaborate and get together. They want to be the big boss themselves and play in their own little playground. And that's one of the reasons why we keep seeing new political parties being created. Now, looking ahead to the elections, again, I don't want to underestimate the fact that ideological factors matter. Actually, if you watch Slovak TV, which I do most nights, you'll know that the biggest threat in Slovakia these days are bears. It seems that this is the big threat affecting Slovakia. But of course, that's linked in with other kind of fears or threats. And I don't want to underestimate the fact that the divide between liberal and conservative values is an important theme. So this cartoon from the Slovak cartoonist Shuti that was published yesterday, I think encapsulates really nicely some of the fears that some ordinary Slovaks have, as it were. And so finally, I want to finish with another slide of Shuti's cartoonist. And Shuti kind of arguing here that democracy is a difficult job. So although I'm sort of slightly critical of developments that we've seen over the past 30 years, I would say we can point to the fact that significant progress has been made, but there are certainly many threats ahead. Okay. Děkuju.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much. And I think I will now invite Petra for her remarks.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here on the last day, standing up so early. I hope you're having fun with the beer. I cannot promise you the exciting slides like Tim, but I would like to talk about mobilization for and against liberal democracy in Czech Republic and Slovakia. But before I do that, I would like to thank Tim for bringing us together. And I would like to congratulate Petr and his team for the amazing successes and strength they're bringing East European politics to. It's one of the premium political science journal, not just in the region or on regional politics, but as a whole in Europe. And that's the hard work of Petr and his team. So congratulations and thank you. I would like to speak about populism and civil society and what their interaction means for democracy in these two countries. So the populist zeitgeist, as Kacmude would call it, has taken hold in Czechoslovakia. Both countries saw populists in power, and both countries also saw populists losing power. As everything in this region, the things are a bit complicated, but to our Western colleagues, like come in, it's exciting, it's chaotic, but it's chameleonic. So as Tim showed you, the things may not look the same a year later. And this is especially the case for populists. Populist politics is often driven by demand. So we had a particular type of populist, if you think of the binary distinction between inclusionary and exclusionary populism. In the two countries we are looking at today, a new type of populism emerged. And that was very much driven by demand of what Tim showed us, the demand for effective, good governance. Technocratic populism offers that. It offers governing well, perhaps best encapsulated by Andrej Babiš in promise of running the state as a firm. So running the state, if a successful businessman comes in and says, I have successfully built my business empire. Okay, maybe he doesn't tell you that he mostly relied on state and EU subsidies, but you get the gist of it. What my work mostly concentrates on are the consequences of this proposal, of this social contract. Let's run state as a firm. What does that mean for citizens? What does that mean for civil society? For citizens, to be part of a firm is like being shareholders. elections turn to the meeting of the board, where the board of directors is elected. It's a social contract where in exchange for hopefully good governance, you as citizens are going to remain passive and just don't interact with us and let us go after our job. So what I believe is that understanding how populists and civil society interact in rise to power, in power, and out of power is crucial to help us shed light on the mechanisms of democratic decay or democratic erosion, under which I understand the erosion of quality of democracy and democratic resilience, which would be the ability of democratic institutions, but also of democratic citizenry to keep democracy vibrant. So I already mentioned this particular type of populism, exclusionary populism and technocratic populism in this region coexist with each other. So there is, I think, and we also pushed a bit further in the other roundtable, that we should return to the labels of far-right politics, extreme politics. So both types of populists coexist in both countries, but their interaction with civil society is very different. And it changes dynamically over the time of their lifespan. So breakthrough into power, in power, and afterwards. But the main thing, if there is like one takeaway, what populism wants in power is aggrandizement, meaning governing, like in a firm, that nobody tells you what to do, that there is no accountability, that you present something and citizens just go and take it. One other aspect of technocratic populism and where we would put both Babiš and Matovič into this category, as it doesn't define itself as left and right, it can actually adopt policies from both left and right. So Andrej Babiš in his second term increased pension and decreased taxes. Not necessarily great for public debt, because you're like spending and you have less income. So it's definitely not great, but this is something the public likes. And that would be my last word in this part about defining populism, would be to say populist politics is driven by demand. So if you can imagine it as a car, it's not the populist leader that is in the driving seat. In the driving seat is public demand. It's the public opinion, and the leader follows. So what the people want, they go. It's not a strong defined ideology. It's not like we are social democrats, we are here for redistribution, for welfare policies, we are conservatives, we are here for austerity, balanced public budgets, etc., etc. This doesn't really apply to populist politics. They're much more chameleonic. They can also change even within a day. Andrej Babiš last week, I think, went to Brussels, to ALDE, and to kind of say my ANO is a liberal party. But the week before, he was in Budapest taking photograph with Viktor Orban and Sebastian Kurz and others, saying, we are like really into this conservative ideas. We may not be as against LGBTQ people as Viktor Orban, but everything else, we are totally on board with him. So you have this kind of, we call it perhaps chameleonic. You could also call it schizophrenic, but I'm not a medical doctor, so I won't. So what about civil society? Well, in the rise to power, technocratic populists or self-described technocratic populists like Matovič and Babiš actually rely on very often adopt or like soak in anti-corruption NGOs or their agenda, because they use them as a tool, as a stick against establishment, because that enables them, it fits with their agenda, and it enables them to strengthen their message that the reason why the country is not governed well is because the current establishment, the current elite is corrupt. So they come kind of in on the backs of these anti-corruption groups in Czech Republic. This would be during Babiš Rise organization or an umbrella organization of anti-corruption groups called Reconstruction of the State. It's not that these organizations cooperate with them, but it's just that they are kind of, used, their agenda is used. So this is in the rise of power, On the exclusionary populists, which are also here, this would be Tomio Okamura's parties in Czech Republic. This would be Kotleba or Republika in Slovakia. They have other allies. They also need, but they need some other things. What they need is mobilization power. They don't come in with a lot of budgets like former businessmen. So what they need is groups that have audience, groups that have already people, that have established relationship with people that would listen to them. And these are very often socially conservative groups because the values ally. This could be churches, and I'm not only talking about the Catholic Church in this region. That's one, but not the only actor. If you are interested in exploring this, you can go to an award-winning article from East European Politics by Bela Grečkovic about the civic circles and the return of Viktor Orbán to power. It's basically the civil society infrastructure that in cooperation with churches that Viktor Orbán put together to return to power and be re-elected three more times. So that is this for the basics. I wanted to just tell you a little bit. I have, I think, 3 minutes. Yes. In the 3 minutes I have, I would like to tell you a little bit about the state of 3 types of civil society. I rely on another amazing article from East European Politics. Yes, and it's like you have an advertisement, This is not Netflix, you don't have a subscription. So Michael Bernhardt's article on 30 years of civil society in Central and Eastern Europe, and he introduces a typology of 4 types and 4 kinds of civil society. It's an organized civil or institutionalized civil society. This would be interest groups, NGOs. Then he has uncivil society. These are groups that are not only not ascribed to values of liberal democracy. And when I speak of values of liberal democracy, I'm not speaking of liberal values. So not being a small L liberal doesn't mean that you are necessarily immediately uncivil society. Uncivil society are groups that actually espouse hatred, that would go against minorities, and these minorities can be broad. It used to be mostly ethnic minorities. These days you have seen that the bear was wearing a rainbow, I don't know, wife beater. I don't like that word. So T-shirt. So that would be the groups they would go against. And finally, firewall civil society. Firewall civil society emerges when populism gets in power. It emerges to defend civil society. We have seen it in both of the countries. All these groups exist simultaneously, and I argue that the quality of democracy, so whether the democracy will decay or whether it will remain resilient, depends on what are the proportions, what is the strength of these 3 groups. What you would need is a relative strength of institutionalized civil society. You would need them to be firm. You would need them to also be resilient in withstanding the attacks they're going to come, because once in power, the populists are also going to go after the anti-corruption groups because they are not needed anymore. Because now the non-corrupt guys are in power, so of course they don't need any oversight. So the clock changes. That's why we need to look at the different periods, because the mechanism and interaction change. So to sum it all up, uncivil society remained relatively weak until 2022. It has been always a bit stronger in Slovakia than in Czech Republic, but in both countries there has been a significant growth. Firewall civil society emerged also in both countries, but it is stronger in Czech Republic, especially because it's not only located in the capital in Slovakia. You had it, but it was more ephemeral. It did not really last, and it did not really diffuse into smaller cities in the regions. While in Czech Republic, the Million Moments for Democracy managed to sustain over time, but also organize themselves in almost, I think, 85 municipalities. So populism sparks pro-democratic mobilization. Populism can be defeated, and it can only be defeated if institutionalized civil society remains resilient, and if firewall civil society mounts a sustained opposition to populism in defense of liberal democracy, rule of law, and democratic values like pluralism. And that's where I would leave it. I would say that in Czech Republic, populism in power was defeated. In Slovakia, we will see. There is a lot of stagnation. There is a lot of, lack of air for institutionalized civil society. And I'm very worried for Slovak democracy in the forthcoming elections. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Petra. And now I would like to ask Zsolt.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the organizers of this panel inviting me or us. And I will, I think, very much follow up the ideas which were already presented here. So I will continue in the populism debate. So I would like to look at the economic perspective, and I would a little bit include the other two V4 countries to the frame as well. So we are having 4 countries, and we are having 4 major populist political parties or movements. And interestingly, they are coming from 4 different party families. Yeah, so Kaczynski, member of the conservative group, Orban for a very long time, member of the European People's Party, Christian Democrats. Fico is still in the European Socialist group, and Babiš is the member of the Liberal group, still. So you would expect, if you don't know Central and Eastern Europe, if you don't know the politics here, you will expect like very different politics according to these very different political affiliation. And my first main point is that they are rather very similar, and they are converging more and more, so they are more and more similar. And basically, since there is a strong demand from the voters, I completely agree, and the largest group in the society is basically socially conservative and economically left-wing, very much vulnerable to left-wing populism and demagogy. So, of course, the main parties react to this, but they also form this. So how do they look? There are basically a combination of these exclusionary, right-wing, social conservatism, to put it very short, no migrants, especially no Muslim migrants, no LGBTI, whatever, no gender, and so on and so forth. So that's the social agenda.
and the economic agenda is the state should take care about you. The state is responsible for you. The state should give you this and that and that. So the free lunch meat, yeah? You deserve it. You deserve free school lunch in Slovakia, free rail travel for pensioners and students in Slovakia, free public transport of all kinds for pensioners in Hungary, free motorways, no in Poland for ordinary cars, and so on and so forth. So this is the combination as a response to the largest electoral group in the country by these populist political parties. And my main point here is that this is, of course, the economic part I want to concentrate, started in Hungary in the 2000s when the left liberal government introduced the 13th pension and other radically increased some social benefits and so on. And Orban's reaction was not that, oh, but who is going to finance it? Where are the sources for it? It's dangerous. It's undermining the fiscal sustainability. Oh no. Orban's reaction was, yes, you have the 13th pension, but you are still living worse than 4 years before. So vote for us. We will give you the 14th pension, of course. Yeah. So this populism is getting worse, and it's spreading to other parties. And the main point here is that it has been least present in the Czech Republic, actually. So still don't have free trains for students. Yeah? Poor guys. Or 13th and 14th pensions, right? Nor free motorways. I don't know about the school lunches for children in elementary schools, and so on. So we can continue. It seems to be that a kind of debate in the other V4 countries, the other free ones, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, as like the fiscal responsibility entirely disappeared from the debate, as if they were endless resources from state public finances covering all the expenditure, and as if it's no problem. So it only depends on the will of the ruling politicians if they give you what you deserve. Yeah. So the good politician will give you all these gifts because you have rights, you have entitlements, you deserve it. And the other side, yeah, the more responsible one, which is almost entirely missing from the public debate, those are the social monsters. They don't like you. They are bad guys. They don't want to give you what you deserve. Yeah, this is like the public debate currently, unfortunately, in our countries. And you see the fiscal results, yeah, rising public debt and deficits, like and even the problem is that this mentality, this rhetoric, is spreading also to the democratic parties, because they feel like we are unable, yeah, we are unable to fight with this kind of populism. So rather we are going to promise that we will keep all these social things or even give you more. Yeah. So look at the Polish debate and the campaign. Like Kaczynski is coming, we are going to increase from 500 to 800 zloty the monthly payments for every single children. And what was the reaction of the opposition? Oh, not that. Sorry, do we have enough sources to cover that? But yes, we support it. We will keep it. And you can do it immediately. Don't wait until the elections. So that's the problem, that in the economic part of the populism, this behavior is spreading also to the, let's say, democratic parties or parties in the center, in the democratic center. So that was kind of first point. The second point, Slovakia and Czech Republic. Yes, I agree completely with Tim. There were many zigzags, but it also applies for the economic policy. So in Slovakia, compared to the Czech Republic, we were going very much to the extremes, very much to the edge, both sides. Yeah. So first, in the early 90s, there was one of the first attempts. Former US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright called it Slovakia might be the black hole of Central Europe. So by Vladimir Mečiar's government, it was one of the first attempts of what we call today democratic backsliding or illiberal turn or deconsolidation of democracy and so on. There are many words for it. Then suddenly we had the most comprehensive economic reforms of the second wave in the late 90s, early 2000 by two consecutive during the governments. So that's jumping from one extreme to the other. So the most responsible, the most comprehensive in-depth structural reforms, which created the so-called Tatra tiger phenomenon. Then Fico arrived to power and he created one of the most comprehensive captured states in the region. You can compare it only to Orban's Hungary in its effectivity. What do I mean by that? Systemic, endemic, organized corruption by the ruling elite. So corruption is not something which is prohibited and the state institutions are fighting against, but corruption is organized by the state. Corruption is organized by the ruling elite. Corruption is the rule, not the exception. So, and again, another extreme. Of course, there were some attempts also in the Czech Republic to do things like that. I'm not telling you there is no corruption. There is no grand or large corruption in the Czech Republic, but it never evolved to that systemic nature, what we can witness in Slovakia until 2020 and still can see in Hungary, of course, under Orban. Later, again, this system has collapsed. So after 2020, the corrupt populism was replaced by anti-corruption populism. But the fiscal policy hasn't changed at all from my economic point of view, unfortunately. So again, probably no parallels to this, except for Romania and the so-called Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office, DNA in the Romania. So many politicians are investigated, including high-ranking politicians, state officials, and so on, judges, prosecutors, former chiefs of police. So the numbers are very high indeed. So these are the so-called zigzags or from one extreme to another extreme in the Slovak case. And as I see in the Czech Republic, it was much more in the center. It was much more moderate. There were not so many excesses in economic policy terms as well. So not running very high deficits and creating huge public debt on one hand, but also not having like very complex economic packages did by one single government in the 2000s. Like, of course, the very first economic reforms by Václav Klaus are an exception, but at that time we were together as Czechoslovakia. And basically one major and remarkable difference between the two countries, the introduction of the euro, which is still exceptional in the whole V4 group, in Slovakia was the result of these economic zigzags and extremes. Of course, it was the result of the comprehensive structural economic reforms. Okay, final remarks. I think we are very much concerned in Slovakia about the future development. It seems to be that we are turning towards east, and the Czech Republic decided to stay together with the West, to put it very simply. So it's not just the opinion polls and the preferences of the political parties which show this change, but also opinion polls regarding the values, the mindset of the people. If you look at these Globsec trend opinion polls, you can see like Slovakia with Bulgaria are the two most friendly countries to Russia, buying most the Russian narratives. In the case of the Ukrainian wars, like 50% of the people saying that it's the West and Ukraine to blame for the Russian invasion in Ukraine. 50% of the people is considering the United States as a security threat for Slovakia, not Russia, the United States, and so on. We can continue. So there is a kind of continuous separation in the mindset of the people, and these elections are going to be reflecting this shift. And we are very much concerned about the future of Slovakia. And it seems to be the Czech Republic is pretty much and well integrated to the West, at least from our perspective. And I think it's partially pretty much path dependency. Like Czech Republic has been always the most developed part of the region economically, like for hundreds of years. And it was at the beginning of the transition, and it is now after 30 years of separation. So Czech Republic is gradually taking over Greece, Portugal, Spain, Italy is next in the row probably. It's pretty much becoming a standard Western country. And in the case of Slovakia, the division, which was declining after the reforms, we have very fast economic growth. That's absolutely gone now. And we are probably in the trap of the middle income countries. And it's the overall picture is we are not going to keep up. And what we can do about it? So what if populist policies are returning? I'm not very optimistic, because although populist politics are failing, look at the examples of Hungary or Turkey in the terms of economic situation, it seems to be not reflected in the election results or in the public opinion polls. So to put it very short, if Erdogan can win again the elections in spite of inflation running at 80 to 100% and 60,000 people dead in the earthquake, then what could happen? So it seems to be if you control enough, if you control 80, 90% of the media in your country, then you will explain everything to your voters. You can frame the public debate and your power is not endangered. So there is the concern from our side that if Mr. Fico comes back after these elections, he will try to do the same. He will learn from Orban and other populists. And then the prospects are bleak, but there is also a kind of positive final remark that at least the European Union seems to learn from these lessons. The reckless corruption, including the European funds. So now there is a mechanism to punish these politicians, to stop the flow of the EU money to these corrupt systems. which of course might be used also in the case of Slovakia if the captured states, the corruption returns. So the EU is not that much defenseless as it used to be for over a decade in the case of Orbán's regime in Hungary. If that's a positive remark to the end, then I will finish here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Zsolt. So I now invite you to pose your questions. And if you just could state your name and affiliation.
I will.
Before you.
Yep, cool. Okay, I'm Sean Hanley from University College London. I've got one simple question, which is, we all are interested in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, but does it actually make sense to compare them? What do we learn by comparing these two often compared countries in wider terms, apart from the fact that they're kind of similar and kind of different? Second question is really a request. Petra, please could you tell us your views, given that we've got a bit of extra time, because I'd love to hear them. And, you know, we've got 5 stars up there, including the chair. So please, could you stick in some comments if you're able to? Thanks.
Views on? Views on what?
Could you just tell us your views on the roundtable on the Czech and Slovak developments, and be a kind of discussant as well as a chair, if you could.
Actually, if you can hear me, I am already connected as a speaker. This is Darina speaking.
So this is Darina speaking. That's great, Darina. So we will return back to Sean's questions. Darina, thanks for being with us. This is really great because we thought that you could not connect with us. You have your 10 minutes for your remarks. We will really be happy to hear it.
Thank you very much, and I apologize to all people in the audience and in the panel. I try to contact, but of course everybody has switched off their mobiles, or they didn't read email messages. So I am just happy that I could join us, even I cannot walk because I sprained my ankle. Basically, and very shortly, I would like to follow this feeling which was shared by Zsolt. You know, Tim started his presentation with the argument that it depends on the time. When you look at things, at developments, because really during these last 30 years, the things were changing fastly. But I would say that it is important, it depends from where you look. And I still can feel, and I think that Zsolt kind of demonstrated it, that many Slovaks, not all, but many Slovaks, we always envy to the Czechs. Well, we just assume that it's richer, more developed, more modernized. Therefore, the country which did not have to face such difficult challenges, especially in like in 90s in Slovakia, we had to face. So just a few comments on political parties and party system. Frankly, I always envied to the Czech party system that not only their political parties are more stable, more organized, even they have party members, because this is something we do not have in Slovakia. Actually, it was Andrej Danko, the leader of Slovak National Party, who pushed for a legal regulation that political parties, they are required by the law to have some organization, some structure, and some members. And there was in Czech Republic, which I think that for the stability of democracy and the quality of democracy was very important, that there was for a long time the main structuring issue, which had been socio-economic, and it created left-right dimension. Well, till the moment when the former federal Slovak, Andrej Babiš, decided to join the politics. Unfortunately, the Slovak gift was kind of danae gift, because since then I just assume that relatively stable pattern of party competition has been weakened. I am not saying that it has disappeared, but it has been weakened, and as a Petra really very convincingly showed and illustrated that the populism, even if this was this type of technocratic populism, destroy, in my view, the ideological stability of the party competition. In Slovakia, party competition has been different, always more structured, more chaotic. I do not want to go into the details, just I provide the number of competing parties in 2023 elections in a few days. There are 25 competing parties in such a small country as Slovakia is. Even the colleagues from University of Matej Bell, which created the application Electoral Compass for voters, when they were consulting their project with the colleagues from abroad, the foreigners were shocked. How come that there are 25 parties which are not only registered but also able to register for election? And I am just afraid that political science should ask more why, especially in Slovakia, why the party competition remains more a childish game, as Tim showed in wonderful cartoon he presented, than a serious relation, some kind of stable pattern of issues or position of parties. I would say that we should look more closely and more in details into legacies, because definitely the impact of Mečiar, and especially his let's say tendency toward semi-autocratic or semi maybe authoritarian government in 90s, and especially all these institutional changes he pushed in late 90s, they played a role. Besides legacies, we should look also to the institutions, because in Slovakia has only one electoral district, and this really set the incentives for very small, tiny, elitist party led by single leader who is actually the owner of the party. And moreover, the state provides too generous, I would say, financial support, subsidies for political parties depending on electoral results. Therefore, incentives to found a political party are enormous. Look, for example, at Boris Kollár. His motivation to join politics, they were basically led his attempt to use this money for his own for establishing his own business again back on the feet, because before he found the party, he was almost broke up. This is what it's difficult to prove, but some journalists, they were warning about this. And moreover, besides these two subjects, legacies and institutions, we should probably also look at issues which have shaped the patterns of party competition. And besides, let's say, this national identity, which basically led to the breakup of Czechoslovakia, I just assume that some issues were not researched in detail. And this is, for example, negative impact of privatization. And if you excuse me, and this is the reaction to Zsolt and his description of corruption organized by the state, I would say that corruption as such, especially in Slovakia, has contributed to the destruction of party competition. I know, and I apologize already for that, that maybe this is kind of heresy, but corruption, when I was talking to businessmen from the West, they said, okay, we were used to receive some kind of official provision, corruption, because we act as moderators. We put people together. But in your countries, in your culture, there were the incentives and also the demand for more money from the business were enormous. And the impact on the corruption is that basically nobody dares, you cannot organize the corruption, competition, party competition along corruption line. And this is what really is destroying Slovakia, because nobody can say that we are for corruption. Everybody is against the corruption. And of course, each party blames the other party that they are more corrupt. So, and that's why the Slovak voters are disoriented, and we do not have a clear structuring issues for the upcoming election. These are just very few ideas, especially the last one. It was just a reaction to the Zsolt, and I have not thought the properly. And of course, it's a strange, but the bears and other strange creatures dominate the 2023 elections in Slovakia. And I know that many of you know that the migration is again the issue in Slovakia. So I just wanted to say that probably we should put more effort to study the issues which were shaping or even not shaping party competition pattern. And that's it. Everything I finish on this line, and thank you very much to the ECPR and Charles University team which connected me. Thank you very much.
Darina, thank you very much. That's very nice that you were able to join us now. This is uncomfortable situation online. So stay with us just in case there is also a question directed to you. So shall we go back to Sean's question? And his first was directed to, or was it only directed to me, the question? Okay. It's probably unfair that I face the first question rather than the panelists that did all the talking. But I take it, the question, but I will, in some respects, actually return it back in a different question, and not even speak about developments in Czech and Slovak politics, but rather to just say a few words about the developments in the way how we study East European politics in general and Czech and Slovak politics in particular. And what really strikes me being here, but also being here in the past, is how much has changed actually in terms of how the scholarship on the region and on these two countries has been formulated, and specifically by whom it has been formulated. So if I was here like 20 years ago, most of this reflection and discussion would be basically led by people based in Western European universities. Some of those people would have been incredibly knowledgeable also about the region. Sean, Tim are a great example. They also speak the languages. Probably most observers would just have basically data sets, not much of a knowledge of the region, but they would be at the forefront of the discussion. And then there were here and there a couple of people from the region, from the universities in the region that would speak about these countries. And that's now really fundamentally different. And we see it also in the submissions to the journal, where you now get incredible number of really good scholarships also from the region. So I will now return it to the panelists as a question. Considering these developments, which probably most of us will understand as being very positive, my question would be: you all study different aspects of Czech and Slovak politics, populism, party politics, political economy. Darina has always studied political systems in the region. I would like to ask you, what do you think is the most important development, conceptual, theoretical, perhaps also empirical, but especially conceptual and theoretical, that the study of these countries brought to political science? We see this integration. We see it on the level of persons and universities. But what do you think is the sort of theoretical, conceptual development in your subdisciplines or subfields that has been brought in by studying these phenomena of populism or civil society or party politics or political economy or political systems to Bratislava? Yes, sorry to answer the question by returning the question, but that's what the chairs very often do.
Thank you. And also back to Sean's question about populism. I think it's a zeitgeist and a buzzword. I think the zenith has been reached. I don't think it's going away, and I don't think we should stop studying it. But I believe that we need to disentangle the populist style, which is here to stay as long as it works, and it works quite well, and the host ideologies like nativism and authoritarianism. So I would plead for conceptual clarity, and I don't think that after almost 3 decades of the intense study of populism, I'm not going to read any more articles that start populism is hard to define. No, you need to pick your definition and you need to run with it. So this is what I think. I think it's a broader symptom of reconfiguration of politics. And it is not happening just in the East. And that brings me to the next. I think that the biggest development that is here, like empirically, is that you just, and trust me, I tried. I think we have exhausted the methodologically grounded comparison of the region alone. Like, you cannot just do the internal variation within the so-called Visegrad group, which is Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary. I mean, on any variable you can imagine, regime, one of the countries is no longer democracy, etc., etc. And I think we really need to, and I want to echo what our keynote speaker, Professor Popova, said the other day, that we need to actually get out of these silos. And it is not just a plea for the colleagues from the region, it's also for the colleagues studying the region and for colleagues studying Western European politics. I mean, you know, it's when I read articles about Western European politics, it has been 30 years since these countries have been democratizing. Also the excuses of, well, you know, the democracy is way too young there, so we need to stick to just analyzing Western Europe. Like, these aren't by now excuses, they are not grounded, and we need to select our cases on variables, not on comfort of our data sets. And I understand it's hard to study this region because it has many languages, but a case selection of Switzerland, Austria, and Germany is like quite obvious, and it's very painful to see the case justification on that. So I would more go into, I think the developments are mostly methodological. And the final comment I would perhaps say, I think that polarization is here. It's here to stay, and I think this region offers an excellent space for studying a lot of phenomena, and it should be like these party systems in Central and Eastern Europe should be studied by scholars of Western European politics, because the things are happening here are going to happen in few years in Western Europe as well. Perhaps here the parties have shallower roots, less members, and that enables the processes to be more accelerated. But all social democratic parties in Europe would be smart to look towards Czech Republic, where social democrats didn't make it to the parliament the last time. And the only opposition to the mainstream parties are populist, both technocratic and exclusionary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Petra. Tim or Zsolt?
I'm happy to go. Is that working?
Yeah,
Okay.
Tim, yeah.
Yes. Okay, great. So, Petr, to your question about most important, useful kind of development, it follows on actually from something Petra just said just now. As my frequent co-author, Kevin Deegan-Krause, often likes to argue, the future lies east. And I would suggest that if we're trying to understand the instability of party politics, West Europeanists should wake up and read the literature on Central and Eastern Europe. It has a lot to contribute. I would also say, by the way, West Europeanists should be reading a lot of stuff written on Latin America as well, which is extremely helpful in terms of explaining instability. So I think that's actually a sort of main area that we have contributed. I've tried to do that in my own way. It's up to others to determine whether it was significant or not. The second thing I just wanted to say, responding back to Darina, absolutely, Darina's addition to my point is a very good one, that it matters not just when you look, but from where you look. I think what's interesting, if you think about Czech-Slovak comparisons, it's very interesting how still in Slovakia, the Czech Republic is often the country which Slovakia compares itself to. It's noticeable that coverage of Czech politics is still quite significant in Slovakia, less so perhaps in the Czech case, although I don't follow the Czech media as closely, but whenever certain developments happen in Slovakia, like for example, the election of Čaputová, there was quite a lot of coverage then in Czech media, and a lot of looking at the Slovak case and wondering, how did that happen in Slovakia, and could it happen kind of here in the Czech Republic? And obviously there are parallels that we might want to link in with the case of Petr Pavel being elected president not so long ago here. And I just also wanted to agree with Darina that her points about the kind of national identity and the legacies, or what I prefer to call the kind of inheritance of the kind of 1990s period, is still quite significant and still needs to be better understood if we want to understand politics in the 21st century. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Darina, would you like to And then I go to Zsolt, yeah?
Okay, thank you very much again. Basically, there are, because I met many of the top leading political scientists like Petr Kopecky or Tim Haughton, Petra Guasti, of course also Zsolt, at the time when they were PhD students, and not only them, there were also coming to Slovakia, Ingrid van Biesen and so on. So I just assume that there are many concepts which were generated by the scholarship related to the region. Definitely state capture of Abbey Ines. Of course, Ingrid has contributed to the study of party competition as well as Petra. And many others, not talking about Kasmude. And his study of populism. I would say that my perspective is that especially in early 90s, the academics located in Central Eastern Europe who were a little bit older than me, or as old as I was at the time, they have contributed by talking to these young PhD students and sharing the knowledge, helping with the organization of their research. And I think that political science benefited from this cooperation. And unfortunately, it's true that the academics who are located in Central Eastern Europe, they are still not taken as equal. That's a pity, but this is the debate for to another one. I would like to add just one issue, and this is that we should really look at the levels of and structure of party competition, because without competition there cannot be a democracy. But if the competition is self-destructive, as it is right now in Slovakia, we cannot have democracy. That's it. Thank you, Petr.
Thank you, Darina. And Zsolt, very quickly, if you would wish to, we have questions from the audience again.
Just a few remarks from the economic point of view, maybe. So at least the V3 countries, except the Czech Republic, are so similar in many things I mentioned. But then there are large question marks that then why they are so different in some other things, like the level of corruption and state capture, which is obviously the case of the Hungary, and it has been for a long time in Slovakia, but almost entirely missing from Poland, like much lower levels of corruption and no systemic and organized nature. Although we might argue that if the PiS is winning the elections again, they will end up the same way, maybe, but it's still not happening. So why? The other one is using the utilization of the European funds, which is a disaster in Slovakia. We are always late. We are always trying to use in the last possible minutes. And this year is, again, a good example. And on the other hand, you have Poland and Hungary, and then Hungary is using it very well, but in a very corrupt and partially ineffective way. And Poland is using them very well with much lower corruption and I think much higher effectivity. And if I can pick up only one thing, look at the development of the infrastructure, the transport infrastructure, which is highly connected to the European funds in all countries. Like Poland had basically no motorways at the start of the transformation, and look at now the network, and also the incredible development of railways. Although I know there are many problems, but from the point of view of Slovakia, it's something incredible, both the effectivity and the speed. And finally, there are some common points. So the remarkable reindustrialization of these four countries, like how we became the largest automotive producers after Germany as a bloc in the European Union, how we managed to attract FDI, how we are deeply integrated to the European core markets, especially to the German economy, which is kind of unique. But on the other hand, still, they are quite different and maybe even more differing parts of economic convergence towards some EU average or Western levels. So these are all questions to study and many possible answers probably for that.
Okay, thank you, Zsolt. I had, let me see, how many other questions we will have?
Thank you. I have a little bit of follow-up question, perhaps, to this round of discussion. Martin Neumann from University of Southern Denmark. Because coming from a Western European perspective, the question is that, or my question is that 1993 was roughly the same time when there were war breaking out in Yugoslavia. And it was very puzzling to hear all the problems, but also to hear what the achievements here now. And I think many of the countries in the Western Balkans also have quite serious problems. And so my question is, and also I see from outside that there's no political agenda and has not been to kill all Czechs or vice versa. So my question is basically, why is this the case? And what is the decisive critical factors or turning points which differentiates the development of Czech Republic and Slovakian Republic from the Western Balkans?
Super good. Yeah, actually, very good question, because we reflect on the 30 years of the breakup of Czechoslovakia. But one of the most remarkable things about that breakup of Czechoslovakia is that if you compare to many other federal systems that broke down, this was a very peaceful one. In fact, if not the only peaceful secession or breakup of a federal state.
Okay, so is the question, why did they separate it and why didn't they kill each other during that? Okay, so the literature which has been produced in the last 30 years, I would summarize it as follows. There has been two major reasons. One is the desire of Slovakia for state sovereignty that has not been fulfilled in the 1980s. And why didn't they? And also let's say, diverging views on the speed of economic transition. And I think I think it's important to recall what Darina just said about that we still need to study the 90s. I would argue the same can be said about studying the reunification of Germany. I think we like to swipe some stuff under the carpet and then they come back to haunt us in, for example, manifestations such as large-scale support for radical right. Why didn't they kill each other during that? Yeah, we are not into violence. Violence is just not culturally so much rooted here. It was a very much elite division. It was still in time when a lot of was disoriented, but this luckily is not the part of the world where people would fight each other, and maybe we are probably also a bit lazy for that.
Tim?
So maybe a couple of things to say which might be useful. I mean, the way in which Czechoslovakia broke up, I mean, it's actually quite fascinating. You go back to that period and about 80% of Slovaks and 70% of Czechs didn't actually want the breakup, right? And there was no referendum. It was essentially an elite-driven decision. But what's interesting is that those two politicians who couldn't agree on many things, Václav Klaus and Vladimir Mečiar, could agree that maybe it was better for them to divide the state because Slovakia would have what it wanted, which was a greater degree of autonomy, and Klaus had what he wanted, which is none of these difficult Slovaks holding back the radical economic reforms I wanted to introduce. So in a way, both of those politicians, they had no incentive to kind of stoke up any discontent. They got what they wanted from that kind of deal. And perhaps another thing which is important to sort of contrast with some places in the Balkans, for example, there was no real issue over the border, right? There were no real kind of disputes about is this the Czech lands or is this the Slovak lands, which of course in the Balkans there were lots of those kinds of discussions. So I think those are two factors which contribute to it, to why it was relatively peaceful.
Darina?
Well, if I can provide some kind of joke or joking answer, why we did not kill each other, because there are some cultural stereotypes that the Czechs, they are peaceful nation which doesn't like to fight, and Slovaks, and especially at the beginning of 90s, due to the image of Vladimir Mečiar, we were always portrayed in the foreign press as aggressive. But even Vladimir Mečiar could count, and actually there are twice as many Czechs as Slovaks. So that's why we did not kill each other. So, but this is only as a joke. And when I am talking to my students, I also put into their attention the complicated structure of the federal constitution, because it functioned as a three-chamber parliament. Federal parliament functioned as a three-chamber system, and in one chamber where there was a parity of representation between Czechs and Slovaks, the majority had to be reached. And of course, this chamber was full of Slovak nationalists and the former communists who, for different reasons, did not feel very happy in the former Czechoslovakia. So the constitutional design was also the factor which contributed to the split. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. And I just would add one thing, which perhaps also I agree with everything that was said. It's a kind of very paradox that Czechoslovakia was created 1918. From what I understand, most populations didn't really want it. It was an LE deal. Then 1992, Czechoslovakia disintegrates. Most of the population doesn't particularly want it. It is an LE deal. But also important for that deal of disintegration is to realize that it followed already a very bloody conflicts elsewhere in the region. So in geopolitical context was also very important, because by that time the big players in the international politics started to understand that it's not maybe sometimes wise to oppose this integration of the federal states, but it's actually better to prevent the conflict. So it became much more open to the idea that the country split up. as soon as they will split up in an orderly way. So they made it much easier to sell also to the Western politicians and policymakers that this is possible. But it followed already bloody disintegration of Soviet Union. Okay, we still have space, time. Other questions? Wow, the sea of non-existing hands. John, you always have about 100 questions. No, but no other questions? Okay, thank you. If you could again quickly state your name and you get the microphone.
Julian Erhard from University of Bern, Switzerland. So I was wondering because when you, Tim, when you talked about that there are the same leaders over a long time, does this only hold true for the populist party? Is this something populist leaders, leader figures, or is this a general trend over all parties? And I was wondering about the party institutionalization as well. How does it look like? With membership, perhaps, etc. Thank you.
So, yeah, I'm on. So, I'm in a minority in political science. I'm not really a big fan of the term populism, so I don't tend to use it. And I don't tend to classify parties as populist or not populist. But I'll take the question, I think, in the spirit that it's asked. So actually what's very striking is, so I had that visualization from 2020 elections and showing that essentially the parties that entered parliament still had their founding leaders. And I think it's significantly because so many political parties become or associated with particular individuals. It's their specific kind of project to kind of set it up. And if there are any kind of rivals or others who emerge, they see that the exit option is easier. It's relatively easy to form a new political party in this part of the world and be relatively successful, actually. That's actually a major problem. Having said that, there are some political parties in both the Czech and Slovak republics where we have seen significant leadership change, and where actually we might suggest that their organizational structures were more than just the leaders. But actually what's quite interesting is if we go back to the last Czech elections. So Czech politics was dominated by 4 political parties for the first kind of couple of decades. And what's very striking in those last elections was 2 of those perennial parties of Czech politics, the Communists and the Czech Social Democrats, fell below the threshold. And both of those parties, I think, were pretty well institutionalized. They had changed their leaders on a number of occasions. We might suggest that these are precisely the parties that we might imagine might survive. I mean, one of the reasons, though, that they didn't was the challenge that came from Babiš. I mean, one of the things that Babiš did very effectively in Czech politics was when he initially formed his party, it was kind of vague, maybe centrist, maybe even slightly on the right, difficult to kind of place ideologically. But Babiš is no idiot, and he realized where the possibility was to kind of get support. And so he moved the party and the appeals much more to the left, and basically took a lot of votes away from the Social Democrats in particular, but also from some of the communist votes as well. So even parties that seem to be quite well institutionalized, seem to be perennial players, they find it difficult to, they can find it quite difficult to survive when they're having to compete against challenges like someone like Andrej Babiš. I hope that's at least a bit of an answer. Others may have other things they want to say.
Petra, Zsolt, anything to add? No? Okay. Other questions? We have space for one, basically. Yes, please.
Yeah, you could hear me. Marek Peshin, LMU Munich. If we want to avoid the term populism, for example, like centrist populism or technocratic populism, what's then the best label for parties such as Směr or ANO? Like, is it a good idea to label them like left authoritarian parties or PiS in Poland, Fidesz in Hungary?
So we have, I think, two people that one does try to avoid the term, and I take it that Petra, you are probably much more in favorable to maintain it as an analytical category. You want to start?
Look, I don't, so my work is not on political parties, so I'm not into categorization of political parties. For me, populism is a phenomena, ideational and stylistic phenomena. For me, actually, parties that have other ideologies can also use populist strategies, and they do so successfully. And I think we really need to focus more on distinguishing. So what is the style part, whether and what is the host for those we would predominantly see as populists. So I think we need to go back more to conceptual stringency and describe the parties for what they are, and understand that. I mean, this was the amazing map by Tim and Kevin, is just showing you that's a mess, and it's also a mess in terms of ideology. It's also a mess in terms of policy. But this is the moment we are in, and not just in this region, but also in Western European politics. So I think we need to distinguish this and look at if we are looking from the ideological point of view, then the answer will be something else. It just depends on the variable. It depends what you want to study, and that's how you would. That's how I would characterize the subjects.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah. So actually, I mean, so I don't like classifying parties as populist or not populist, but actually I'm not that far away from Petra's views. I mean, Kevin and I wrote a paper published a long time ago talking about populist appeals and suggesting it's much more helpful to think about populist appeals rather than labeling someone a populist or not. One of the arguments that we tried to make in that article was that many politicians, many parties use to a greater or lesser extent some of those populist appeals. And it's more useful to look at those constituent appeals and how they're then used and maybe packaged together by different parties than by trying to get into a classificatory debate about does a party fall under this category populist or this category non-populist. In a broader sense, how we might then categorize, I don't know of any brilliant, I mean, there are some good classifications out there which are very helpful. Anti-establishment centrists, for example, there's a number of works that have used that, which is quite helpful to describe some of those parties. But of course, Marek, not all of those parties that you mentioned would fit into that. But I think maybe, yeah, we're better off if we can focus more on the types of appeals and the way that these are packaged together rather than trying to define parties as populist or not. I think that's a much more helpful way to go.
Okay, thank you very much. Zsolt.
Yes, certainly I see many common points, even if you don't use the term populism. It was mentioned several times by Tim, Petra, Darina as well. The structure of the parties themselves, like very much centralized, hierarchical, no internal party democracy, one-man show, so unquestionable that who is the leader, and these parties, it's typical for the Slovak politics, but I think it's the case of Andrej Babiš's party as well. They are living and dying with the leaders. So it's so much centralized and personalized, and also authoritarian tendencies they have to disrupt the rule of law, attacking not just their political opponents, but the freedom of speech, the media, the NGOs, the minorities, and of course trying to undermine the rule of law also because of investigations against them. So it is presented not as a legitimate process in a kind of democratic society, but kind of a political witch hunting against us because our political opponents are trying to defeat us this way. So there are many common things, but again, it applies for it sounds familiar, I think, for many people coming from Central and Eastern Europe, this kind of behavior for many, actually mostly dominant in large parties in other political systems and countries.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we are coming close to finish our roundtable. So first of all, I would really like to thank all the contributors, Tim, Darina, Petra, and Zsolt. I think they do deserve a little applause, very big applause for their contributions. And also thank you very much, you all, for turning up at 8:30 on Friday and asking your questions. Who knows, maybe in 30 years, there will be 60th anniversary of disintegration of Czechoslovakia. We will be here again or some of you will be here again to reflect on the developments. I wish you a very nice morning and the rest of the conference, and see you around.